So we've been talking about decision-making in organizations at the individual level, also decisions in the context of operating within a system, and that system driving decision-making towards efficiency rather than effectiveness. So the decision realms that we've talked about, information, values, and resources, we're focusing on resources in this video. And the fundamental resource that we need to do the work is time. Well, how do you get time? Well, you staff your agency. The question then becomes, well, how do you staff your agency? And for most law enforcement organizations, they use a population ratio of 1 officer per 1,000 residents. Well, the problem with that is it doesn't have anything to do with workload. It doesn't examine and consider the differences between community type, crime intensity. So is it 1 per 1,000 in Beverly Hills or Compton? Is it Irvine's daytime population, which is 5 times higher than its nighttime population? Which one are you going to go with? So the population ratio really doesn't work. It's just something that people are commonly familiar with, and then they just guess and plug in the numbers and hire that many people according to what their budget will allow. So what's a better way? A better way is to do it by workload. And I found that many organizations do not do workload analyses. Here's the fundamental work that we need to get done, and so for law enforcement, burglary, robbery, homicide investigations, what have you, how long on average does it take to do that? And then here's a caveat to that. How much time are we actually spending on it? What is the is in this situation? Empirically speaking, how much time in minutes are we spending on each call? And then have we done an analysis in terms of who might we be underserving and need to increase that number? What should we be doing? Going back to domestic violence, we're not spending enough time with those investigations. And the idea is that even if your initial officer is triaging the case, you still have to get a detective involved. You have to factor that workload in. Not necessarily from a patrol standpoint, but at some point you have to integrate that into your detective bureau analysis. So best way to do this is by a mathematical formula. And years ago, I was asked to come up with some better model than the population ratio, prayed about it, and came up with the workload-based mathematical formula. The idea is that your daily minimum staffing, the absolute minimum number of officers you need to staff a shift to handle the public generated calls for service, or CFS. So that's a function of how many calls the public generates, multiplied by time on call in minutes, so drive time and time on scene, which also accounts for any backup officers that show up, divided by 60, so you can get hours per year, divided by 365, so you get hours per day, and then divided by what's called a saturation point. And the idea with the saturation point is the International City County Management Association, or ICMA, conducted a study in 2013. They looked at 48 law enforcement organizations across the United States, and they tried to figure out, well, should we be doing this on workload? Now, they didn't come up with a formula, but they came up with some important ideas. And one of those ideas is a saturation point. And what they said is that once an officer spends 60% of their shift handling calls for service, they have no time to do anything else. No proactive enforcement, no community engagement, no problem solving. It's just you're handling call to call to call to call to call. That's all you're doing during your shift. The other 40% of the shift is briefing, report writing, booking evidence, doing other administrative tasks. So that's your admin time. So 60% handling calls, 40% administrative time, and then that's all the time you have for that shift. Well, the problem is when you're guessing on population ratios, what is the actual saturation point? Well, nobody really knows. And so what I found in my research, and as you'll see on the PowerPoint presentation that's on Blackboard, and the presentation I gave to the La Quinta City Council on this, that you'll see also on Blackboard, those numbers vary. And so we'll get into that as well. But they came up with a saturation point of 60% or 0.6, and then you divide that by your shift length. The longer your shift, the fewer officers you need to staff to fill that minimum staffing. The shorter your shift, the more officers you need to cover those gaps. And so let's take a hypothetical of 130,000 public generated calls for service per year, multiplied by 54 minutes on call, divided by 60, divided by 365, 0.6, and 12. That gives you need 44 and a half officers per day at minimum staffing. And what I found in my research, this actually applies to the city of Moreno Valley for 1 year. ICMA's average time on call was 48 minutes. We had other cities, which again you'll see in the PowerPoint, that were as low as 37, but Moreno Valley was the highest at 54. But that's 54 at a 70% saturation point. And so they were only staffing about maybe 32, 33 deputies per shift. So now you have 70% of the shift going call to call to call to call, 30% admin time. So where were the deputies writing the reports? On duty? Were they getting paid overtime? A lot of them were writing the reports on their own time. So no time for proactive enforcement, long 12-hour shifts, which increases the potential for fatigue. What happens to decision making in that environment? Your stress goes up, you're working in an environment, there's a lot of high priority calls, violent crime, you're understaffed, and you're tired. Yeah, decision making gets pretty bad. How do you fix this? Well, watch the video. But in a nutshell, you have to adjust how many calls for service you're handling, so change your business model. Stop going to false alarms, stop going to non-injury traffic collisions, things like that. Of course, you're going to have to talk with your political overseers and the community in terms of if you're going to shift that business model, include them in that. Reduce your time on call through technology, online reporting systems, hybrid online reporting systems. Have your systems auto-populate report forms, things like that. So that's going to be your tech. And then for your saturation point, you just have to figure that out. As again, you look at the PowerPoint and you watch the video, I explain in more detail how you can save money and increase the time that you have to handle these calls at the same time. Let me know if you have any questions about the PowerPoint or the City of La Quinta presentation, if you have any questions about this mathematical formula. And sometime in March of 25, ICMA is going to publish my article where I talk more in depth about this. And so hopefully by the time the class is in session, I'll be able to upload that article as well. Again, look at the massive impact that understaffing has on decision-making in organizations, on legitimacy, on error rates and things like that. Nobody's thinking in terms of understaffing and a lack of time being a primary factor in decision-making. And one final point on this. We talk about de-escalation all the time. We talk about, getting into a scene, things are getting hyped up, people are getting upset, well, de-escalate. Well, what do you need to de-escalate? You need time. So if people are of this mindset subconsciously that I have to hurry through everything, there's no time for anything, there's always other calls I got to get to, everything has to happen now. There's this saying in law enforcement that when you're dealing with a person that may be resistive to you, you ask them to do something, then you tell them to do something, and then you make them do something. Okay, great. How much time between tell and make? Is it 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, 5 weeks? How much time? Does it have to be me? And so the greatest problem that we have is that we don't step back and buy ourselves time to go, well, how can I de-escalate this through time? Can I do a tactical retreat? Do I set up my scene to where I don't have to force the issue in the first place? And so when you buy folks more time and you have these conversations, you have to have the structural time in place and you have to have their interpretation of how do I best maximize my time to reduce increased uses of force and violence and things like that. So another thing to consider, we'll talk more about that as well. Let me know if you have any questions.